Hi, how are you? I don't actually care. Today I will be reviewing the second Stranger Things novel, which is Darkness at the Edge of Town, written by a certain Adam Christopher. It also came out in 2019 between season 2 and 3, and it's centered around our favorite mustache man, Jim Hopper. So, the name of the book is the name of an album by Bruce Springsteen. He started recording it at the same time that this story takes place, which means late spring to early summer of 1977. So, this album is described as having lyrics focusing on ill fortune characters who fight back against overwhelming odds. And that's kind of the theme of this story. So, I imagine that's why they picked it. So, about the author, it is Adam Christopher. He's from New Zealand, but he's been living in England for a while. So, this is not his first book about the franchise. He's also written books for Dishonored, for example, and Star Wars, among a bunch of others. So, it's definitely not the best book out there. It has a bunch of flaws, but it's definitely not as bad as the first one. But before giving any more detailed opinions, I'm gonna start with a spoiler-free summary and a general review of the book. So the story starts with Hopper and Eleven. They're in his cabin and they're snowed in during Christmas. Eleven is bored because Mike is out seeing family and, he's out of reach of the walkie-talkie. And the TV is not working, because of the snow. So she starts asking questions to Hopper, like, oh, what did you do before? Like, talk to me about your life. What did you become a cop? And Hopper begins to answer, but then he realizes that he doesn't really want to be talking about his past, especially the Vietnam War, both because she's young and he doesn't want to have those memories come back. He tells her to find something else, so she pulls out this box with New York printed on it, and inside is a bunch of files. And he hesitates to tell her about it because he thinks she's too young. But she insists, so he ends up telling her about his time as a homicide detective in New York in 1977. And the case that's in the box in particular. So there had been 3 similar murders with a strange car that's left at the scene every time. So Hopper and his new partner Delgado, they are put on the case until it is taken away from them by the feds. But they felt really involved and they want to keep investigating, so they do it behind their backs. And it turns out to be way bigger than what they expected. So basically we get a back and forth between present day Hopper and Eleven in 1984 and the flashbacks from that case. Personally, I thought they were balanced enough. I didn't think it was too many times or at the time when you think, why is there an interruption now? So I was fine with that. In the acknowledgements, the author says that he hopes he did justice to the characters, and I personally think he did. Well, in the sense that when I was reading the dialogue and the story, I didn't feel like it was out of character. And the speech especially, I could imagine Hopper saying what was written. And same for Eleven, her special way of talking. I thought he mimicked it pretty well. And in general, in the book, the dialogue usually... I see a lot of books where the dialogue is written like the text, and it's so annoying because no one speaks like this. In this case, it was fine. It was written correctly, but in a way that you could imagine people speaking. And some books, for example, the YA books where the 16-year-old character speaks like Shakespeare, come on. And in general, the style of writing was pretty simple, but it was not childish, as in Suspicious Minds. I find it kind of fits the straightforward way of thinking of a detective or Hopper, more specifically. I don't know, I can imagine him thinking to the point. And it would have been weird if it was flourished or poetic, so I thought the style fit the book. My biggest criticism on the writing style is the length of most chapters. Some were crazy short for no reason. For example, chapter 1 finishes with a phone call telling them about the third murder. And in chapter 2, Hopper is inspecting the scene, but it lasts for just 6 pages. And I think it could have just been a paragraph break between the two instead of having two chapters. Especially since right after there is a 2-page chapter with like this little interruption with Eleven and Hopper in present day. The biggest offender, however, is this chapter. This is a chapter. It's not even a page. And it's about something that could have been mentioned later. You know, I don't mind that the chapters with the interruption were short because they should not have been long, since this is not the focus of the story. But I feel like when it's in the story and the chapters are this short, it just takes you out of it. It's like a hard break in the story. For example, if you were reading in your bed and you feel like, come on, one more chapter, then you would be respecting your sleep schedule. Like, this book is 400 pages and there are 52 chapters, not including the interruptions. By the way, when I say interruptions, I will mean the time with Hopper and Eleven talking. That's not in the story from 1977. So there are 52 chapters without these interruptions. So let's say there are, I don't know, 60 chapters. 400 pages divided by 60 chapters, it's an average of not even 7 pages per chapter, which I think is very short. I think it would have been better to like fit more in each chapter. It kind of cut the flow of reading, basically. No, but the story in itself, when you start reading, you expect a serial killer, and well, it's not really a spoiler because you learn about it real quick, but it turns out to be a gang. I like serial killer stories and less like gang stories or organized crimes in general. It's mostly a taste problem, I guess. It's just my opinion, my taste. But yeah, so I didn't like in general where the story went. And so yeah, a gang is big and there were like a bunch of characters that were introduced but never really did anything. Like at some point I was just skimming because I knew I wouldn't need to care about these people, and I think that's a bit useless. And yeah, in the end, just a few of them were like really part of the story. But yeah, in the end, there weren't too many characters that you had to remember, so I thought it was okay. It's just like he introduced a bunch of other ones that were useless, so I don't know why. With like descriptions of what they looked like and what they were wearing. But then they're never seen again, so what's the point? So this book didn't feel as rushed as Suspicious Minds, but it still feels like it was written on a deadline, because the writing is fine, but sometimes there are like typos or weird sentences, and if I see them reading through it, how didn't the editor find them? For example, there's a weird "your."
Can you see? Not too good.
There are also this caught sight. But yeah, I don't think that's the proper spelling. I remember at some point there were like 3 characters and one of them leaves. But then the other 2 continue talking and then they mention the name of the character who just left, like the character is talking. So I didn't understand if they like switched names by accident. Anyway, I feel like this wasn't like read back in depth because I think it would have been seen. And also sometimes during descriptions there was like, oh, there was a chair and there was a desk and there was a dresser, and the way it was written was not ideal. Like a bunch of repetition. For example, the cards that are found on the murder scenes, they're described like 3 times, like being bigger than a regular playing card. Like, I got it the first time. Why did it say it so many times? It's like every time they mentioned them, they would always say again that it's bigger than a playing card. So the book didn't rely as heavily on coincidence and convenience as the first one, but still there are some like really fat coincidences that could have been avoided without changing the story. One that I think about that is not a spoiler is, for example, Hopper meets his new partner, Delgado, and right after they finished introducing themselves, the case about the first murder with the cards is like put on their desk right at that moment. You could have literally just made a time jump of a few weeks of them working together and then said that they received the case. That would have been one more line and it wouldn't have looked so stupid. Like, just why not? Why not? This would not have changed the story at all. I'll talk about the two other coincidences later in a more detailed breakdown of the story. I'm not gonna do a full breakdown like my previous videos because it's not a rant video. It's a mid book, I guess. It's not terrible, but it's not that good. Okay, let's be a bit positive now. Delgado is supposed to be one of the first female homicide detectives, because before they could be detective but not in a homicide. And in the beginning, she is indeed a bit annoying. She's like meeting the others. Yeah, I'm a woman. What's the problem? But it doesn't last long. And in the rest of the book, she's just a character. They don't mention like at every turn that she's Latina and she's a woman. So I thought that was okay. He goes back in time in his story to introduce her. And then afterwards there's this little interruption and Eleven asks something and Hopper gives her a little talk on feminism, that women had to work harder than men to reach the positions and stuff. But after this little talk, and I thought this wasn't totally forced or anything because, you know, that's the kind of stuff you could explain a kid, especially at that time. But afterwards, it's not mentioned again, so it's okay. You know, it's not shoved down your throat every time. No, she's just being a detective working on the case. And also, there's not a single boobie mentioned in this book, which I appreciate from a male author. Thank you, Mr. Christopher. Thank you for not mentioning her tits. Overall, though, the story felt pretty unoriginal. It was just like a basic cop story. Didn't feel very Stranger Things. There isn't much paranormal stuff, like abilities. This was not the most interesting story to tell. I don't know if it's not about Stranger Things at all, but really just Hopper and not just a detective case. Like his time with Diane or what happened with his daughter or something. But yeah, it didn't really feel Stranger Things. It's just that there was his name on it. And that sometimes we could see Eleven talking to him. But that's really it. So if you watch the show and you expect the book to have many aspects from it, like from the paranormal stuff, it's not in there. And I also thought the ending was rushed. There's a lot of build-up and then it's just, yeah, it's finished. So another problem. I thought that the whole read wasn't worth the ending and that this book could have been shorter. So following the Goodreads rating scale, I would give it a 2 stars for it's okay. It's not the worst book I've read, but it's also not amazing. It's pretty weak and it could have been so much better, but yeah, 2 stars, unfortunately. Now I will go into spoilers. It won't be in-depth like my previous one, like I said. Just a summary, but this time telling what happened. Hopper and Diane, his wife, they moved from Hawkins to New York because he wanted to see new things and after going to the war. So they moved to New York where they have their daughter. Or they had the daughter and then they moved, I don't remember. Whatever, it doesn't matter. And thanks to the police being on low funds and the fact that he was a hard worker, he became pretty quickly a homicide detective. And the proper story starts with Hopper attending a birthday party for one of the friends of his daughter. Don't ask me why, the adults are also at the party, but they have their own entertainment, which is a magician slash fortune teller called Lisa Sargeson, or Sargeson. I don't care. I'll just call her Lisa. So when it's Diane's turn to get like her fortune told, she actually gets struck with a real vision. And she talks about this darkness coming over and the day of the serpent and stuff like that. After the party, Hopper gets a call from Delgado saying that there is a third victim with a card. And these cards are called Zener cards. They were used by a psychologist called Carl Zener in the 1930s to conduct experiments on extrasensory perception. Basically the same thing that number 10 does with Brenner in season 4.
What do you see?
It's the sun.
So there's 25 cards, 5 of each design, and the tester has to draw one and the subject has to tell which symbol is on the card. Another thing from the murders is that they are stabbed 5 times to form a pentagram. That was not a pentagram. So they believe these murders are done for some sort of ritual. But at that point, they do not know what a Zener card is. They have no idea what this card is. It's just bigger than a playing card, like they've been saying every time. And these cards are like hand-drawn, even though it doesn't matter in the end. So they've been working on the case for 6 weeks when a federal agent comes and takes it off of their backs. But they're pissed about it because they were feeling very involved in the case for some reason. And Delgado manages to snatch a file with extra information on it while they are taking all their files away. So they continue investigating beyond their captain's back, and Delgado finds a bunch of addresses at the apartment of the third victim. And it's addresses for like support groups for veterans and other stuff. So she goes around, and at one of these groups she meets Lisa, the magician. And she learns that she's actually like a clinical and criminal psychologist and that she just does magician as a side gig because she has no money. And she's a psychologist who's interested in rehabilitating veterans and prisoners. She used to work at a place called the Rookwood Institute, but she left when she realized that she could not complete her research because they didn't have enough funding. And she's the one who informs them that these are Zener cards because Diane remembered like seeing these cards, and so she tells Hopper that Lisa probably knows more about them. And so Delgado comes to see her, and it's mentioned that Lisa graduated from Miskatonic University, the Lovecraft University, and I thought that was funny because it was unexpected, but at the same time, what's the link? Because when I think of Stranger Things, I don't think about Lovecraft, and it's never mentioned anywhere else, so I don't know. Maybe it was just like an Easter egg. So one day a man called Leroy Washington comes at the police station, and he has one of these cards on him. So he's interrogating Leroy to know what he's there for, and he starts talking about the same prophecy that Lisa said during her trance, so that's why he's interested in talking more to him. He's scared and he's asking for protection, but he's like high on something, so Hopper puts him in a cell waiting for him to sober up. But the next morning when he comes to interrogate him, he's been discharged early, so he's mad about it. But fortunately for him, Leroy calls him from a telephone booth and he asks him to go pick him up. And Hopper goes there, he's not there, and he's hanging around, and then at some point he gets kidnapped by Gallup's men. Yeah, I forgot to mention earlier that Gallup is the name of the federal agent that came to take their files. And since he knows he's been snooping around, and he tells him, okay, now you have to work for me and you have to infiltrate the gang that's behind the murders. And Leroy is a member. He's like a recruiter, so he can pretend that he recruited Hopper. But in order to do that, Hopper has to be like a runaway cop. So Gallup plants his weapon on a crime scene, so now Hopper is like searched for by the police. But he doesn't want Delgado and his wife and daughter to think that he's actually a murderer. So he meets Delgado in secret. He tells her that he's gonna be gone for a while and to look after his wife and daughter. And he also tells her to keep investigating on her side. So Delgado is like looking at stuff on her side, and she finds out that the 2 first victims were organizers for veteran support groups, and now she's trying to figure out the link with the third one. So now Hopper has joined the gang and he meets the leader, who is called St. John. And the goal of this infiltration is to figure out what he's planning, because Gallup knows about like this big thing that's coming, but he has no idea when or what or why. So he wants Hopper and Leroy to figure that out. So St. John doesn't tell him when it's gonna be, but he tells him that the devil is gonna come back to New York and take his throne. And in order to do that, he's building basically an army by assimilating other gangs and then going to veteran groups and stuff to recruit people because they're in a weakened state. And Hopper, Leroy, and another gang member actually go to one of these groups to recruit. And Hopper actually starts talking about himself in Vietnam. But I guess then there's just one continuity problem that I saw, is that in this book, Hopper says that he volunteered to go to Vietnam, but in season 4, when he's talking to Antonov, he says that he got the letter in the mail.
I used to think I was cursed. Ever since I was 18. There's some letter of induction in the mail. Uncle Sam wants me to go fight some war in the jungle.
Not the worst discrepancy, I guess nobody could have known, but, it's there. It doesn't really influence anything, so whatever. St. John goes to see Lisa at one of her groups, and he offers her a job at the gang, saying that he's very interested in her research and that he wants her to work for him. And at first she refuses. And we later learn that actually St. John was one of the first people she's worked with at the Rookwood Institute, but she didn't recognize him. So I talked about coincidences, it's one of them, that he goes to see her, he gives her his address, then on that very day, she gets laid off because they don't have enough funds anymore either. Like, there's no notice. She didn't know that they did not have any more funds. Just out of the blue, they say, okay, you stop today. On the day that he gave her his address. Again, they could have put a time jump between the two events. He could have gone earlier, given her his card, and then, I don't know, a few weeks later, she gets laid off, and then she remembers, oh yes, there's this guy who gave me his address. Why at the same time? Well, now that she's jobless out of the blue, she thinks, oh, I might as well go check it out. Even though she wanted to kick him out after seeing that he had a gang jacket. She doesn't want anything to do with them, but she still decides to go. So the address is like this big industrial thing, and she almost gets jumped, trying to arrive, but he takes her in. But first, let's go back to Hopper. He's trying to fit in the group, doing little stuff to try to be more trustworthy. But at some point he gets curious. They're like loading crates onto something and he wants to see what's inside. And he gets into a fight with someone because of that. But St. John comes after he has locked up Lisa upstairs while showing her around. Because she saw some stuff and she started getting suspicious and she wanted to leave. So St. John wants to take Hopper to that room. He talks to him about the plans. Well, vaguely, because he knows he's curious. He's like, oh, I see you're curious, so I'm gonna tell you a bit more about what we're doing here. But then they arrive there and they see that Lisa is not there, so he's like making up search parties to find her in the building. And he tells Hopper to lead one of them. And Hopper is like, let's separate to cover more ground, but the point is just to, be able to go snoop around himself. So he finally can open a crate and he sees that there's like big guns in there. So yeah, they're basically building an army. So obviously, he's the one who finds Lisa. Yeah, out of the whole building and all the people looking for her, he finds her and he tells her to hide and that he's gonna go fetch Leroy to get her out of there because he knows the building better than he does. I mean, I'm sure there would be like doors everywhere, but he starts searching again for more info, but at some point he starts hearing like noise on the roof, so he goes to look what it is, and somehow the whole gang teleported on the roof because it's actually like the Day of the Serpent. They're triggering it right now. Why? It happened so suddenly. There was no hint that it would happen on that day. And why didn't it tell Hopper? Like, it didn't hear anyone, like, go up or them calling out to each other? Or why isn't he in robes with them on the roof? Like, chanting or whatever? Because St. John was, like, talking to him right before, telling him more about the plan. And he didn't, like, talk like it would happen on that day. So I have no idea what happened there. So they're on the roof, they're in robes, and Lisa has been caught by Leroy, but he actually brought her to St. John, and they're preparing her sacrifice. And at some point she just falls off the building and the sacrifice is done. And there's a massive electric blackout in the whole city. And this is actually a real event that happened, not the Day of the Serpent, but like the massive blackouts. So Hopper's on the roof, and then he says no when she's falling, and people are like, okay, catch him. He gets pulled away by Martha, who is Leroy's sister. I don't know why she wasn't under the influence as well. I don't know. So they escape, it's completely dark. Criminals are looting and burning shit. It's a mess. So they want to go to Manhattan to talk to the cops because now he has more information and he can tell Gallup, even though like it's triggered what the point was to prevent it, but yeah, okay. He arrives on a bridge that's blocked off and he's like saying, oh, I'm a cop, I'm Hopper, and then they recognize him being the cop on the run and they arrest him and Martha. But, they're taken in a van, they have to wait a bit, but in the end Gallup comes and he frees them. So Hopper is like, okay, I brought Martha there. Now he has his information. And I want to go see my wife and kid. And Gallup, for some reason, says yes. Even though there's not enough police already. So he's just gonna let a detective go. I mean, you would want to keep everyone, right? He also learns that Delgado was with them. So he arrives at his home. But Diane tells him that Delgado has left. Because there's one building in the city that has power, and it's the Rookwood Institute. They saw all the gang members going there with their weapons. So Delgado went there thinking that Hopper would be there. He's like, okay, I have to go get her. And he drives to the Institute. He arrives there. The gang members are like on sort of mind control, which is St. John's ability from having been in experiments in Vietnam to make super soldiers. And yeah, it's not really used as much as it could have. It's a bit like brushed aside. It's like really, oh, I need like a power to make it sound like Stranger Things, but I don't really want to exploit it or explain it. So I think that was kind of wasted. Anyway, he somehow knocks out one of them. He takes the clothes. He comes inside. And he finds St. John with Delgado. She's on the floor in a pentagram with black candles around. He's making her ready to become the fifth sacrifice, which is the final one. Hopper intervenes, tries to fight, but he gets knocked out. He wakes up in a chair, and he's not restrained, but he cannot move because of John's powers. And John is like, okay, now you're gonna kill her. But Hopper somehow resists. And he fights again. He stabs St. John, but too hard, so he bleeds to death, basically. And the city is saved. And that's the end of the story. So after this finale, I have a bunch of questions. What's the point of Lisa at the end? Because there's so much around her, and then he offers her the job to do stuff there. Was it just to lure her in? I don't know, there's all this talk about the Institute and her work, but then in the end she just like gets taken there, and on the same day she becomes the sacrifice and she falls off the building and she dies. Okay. Yeah, like I said before, how did the day happen so suddenly? Like, they're doing stuff as if the thing is like weeks in the future, and then suddenly they're doing it. Like, without telling Hopper anything. He didn't hear them, like, going up the roof. He didn't hear them, like, putting on their robes. They weren't, like, called or something. Was it the mind control? But then why did St. John not put Hopper on mind control? So he wants to do the 5 sacrifices to get the devil back, but then why then is there the blackout at the 4th? It's not explained why there would be the blackout at the 4th. I mean, shouldn't the blackout coincide with the arrival of the devil? But then he goes to the Rookwood Institute. Why the Rookwood Institute? So why couldn't he sacrifice a gang member? Why did it have to be Delgado? Because she's a random person, so it means that he could just use a random person. I don't know, there's nothing about the sacrifice ever being explained. Apart from the fact that you need 5. Why did St. John trust Hopper like that? So yeah, he's a veteran, but he's a cop on the run. You would suspect him first of doing like infiltration and stuff. So I would be wary of him not trusting him just because he's a veteran, especially after like he learns that he's been like snooping around. Also, yeah, he's a veteran, but shouldn't there be more veterans in the group? Well, in the gang, I mean? Since they've been like recruiting in the support groups. Because there isn't really any other veterans mentioned like when they're introducing like group members. It's just like gang members from other gangs. So why Hopper in particular? Especially since it's super new and he's a cop. Why did they stay on the case? They had no personal ties or anything to it. It's just, yeah, they wanted to do it, but shouldn't they have been happy that like a bigger police force would take it from them, because they knew that there would be more funds and means put onto it. Also, there were just like 2 detectives on like a serial killer case. I think there would probably be more people now. I mean, they were talking about the Son of Sam serial killer that was happening at the same time. But still, why was it just 2 of them? And why did they continue going on it, even though it wasn't that personal or anything? So anyway, I'm not gonna go further into it because I could just ask like these questions like a billion times. Yeah, it wasn't as terrible as Suspicious Minds, but it's still a pretty weak book. The writing was definitely better. I didn't hate the book or anything. I thought it was just okay. Sometimes I was a bit bored because I feel like it was too long for what we got at the end. Just maybe that it wasn't balanced, because what you have to go through to get to the actual like gist of the story is not worth what you get. So, unfortunately, I don't understand why they make these novels like rushed just to make more money. Wouldn't you make more money taking the time to write like canon stories, backstories about the characters that people love, and they want to know what's happening? I'm sure that some people who don't really read but who love Stranger Things could read these books just because they want to know more about their favorite characters. No, I'm reading them just to see what it is, but yeah, this book was pretty disappointing. You don't actually learn much about Hopper. It's just an unoriginal cop story. Anyway, as I said, even though the characters are not fleshed out more than the series, I still thought that the author like respected the characters. It did not punch them down like happened to Terry Ives. But still, I didn't get much from it. If you enjoyed the video, tell me what you think. Leave a like if you did. It helps a lot because, I have a very small channel. I hope you have a good day, evening, or whatever. I don't know, your time zone. And bye-bye.